This week, the HPT crowns a champion from the Stratosphere Casino, Hotel, and Tower. Las Vegas rolled out the red carpet for HPT players from around the country, and when the last player registered to play, over $500,000 was waiting for the talented and skilled who were able to pass the money threshold. Now, only a few players remain to battle for the coveted HPT championship and over $122,000. Let's play some poker.
This is the HPT.
Sit right down, put on your poker face. You with the big dogs now. Better bring your best game. Talk trash all you want. To me, it's all the same. You won't leave with much when you come in second place. And I'm the one with the stack showing 7 to the jack. Gon' cry to your mama, cause I'm sending you back. I'll be the last man standing with the money in my hand. I'll be the last man standing with the money in my hand. Last man standing with the money in my hand. I'll be the last man standing with the money in my hand.
Hello again and welcome to the HPT. This week we crown a champion from the city that made poker famous, Las Vegas, Nevada. And our Sin City host, the Stratosphere Hotel, Casino, and Tower, delivered a first-class event for all who came to play.
The Stratosphere knocked it out of the stratosphere. Las Vegas locals rediscovered this amazing property, and those who traveled for a weekend of poker in Las Vegas had the time of their lives here at the Stratosphere. But when the cards started to fly, the hundreds that played needed laser-like focus and their A-game to navigate this very tough field.
HPT brings out the stars of the game when we come to their backyard, and there's no question that raised the competitive bar. With over $500,000 in the prize pool and the best structure in the game designed by our friend Daniel Negreanu, players battled down to the final 9. And now we're down to 4 players left, still fighting for the championship and over $122,000.
Four-handed is the bubble to the big money in the tournament, with over $15,000 separating third from fourth place and almost $88,000 difference between fourth and first. So every decision from here on is worth thousands. It'll be interesting to see who steps up and outplays the others and takes home over $122,000.
3 eliminations away from 6 figures and the honor of being called a champion. Let's take a look at the money that's on the line and the updated chip count and get right to the action.
And this is where the big money and the significant pay jumps come into play. As you can see, with 4 players remaining, the bottom payout is $34,722.
The big jump is from third to second, though, almost $25,000. Here is the updated chip count.
Richard Lindacker, with 4 players remaining, is looking to take this final table wire to wire. He came into it as our chip leader, and he remains with a stack of just under $3.7 million. Steven and Corey are still fairly comfortable, and even Sean Solar, as our short stack, has 36 big blinds to play with.
We ended last time on the HPT with Sean doubling up, and that gave him a lot more breathing room. Blinds are going to continue here four-handed at $25,000-$50,000 with a $5,000 chip ante. This is Steven Patz, the only amateur left at the poker table.
Sean folds his button, and Corey's going to limp in with Queen 6 suited here from the small blind. And Richard's going to check his option with 7-5.
First flop, four-handed here. Jack 7 King Rainbow.
7 of diamonds, King of hearts.
And Corey's going to bet $60,000, hoping that he could just take this down right here. But Richard has connected with bottom pair, so he might just call.
And that's exactly what he does. He's going to see a turn card and see if that slows Corey down.
Turn card, please.
The turn is a 5, and Rich has improved to 7s and 5s. This is not a good time for Corey to fire again, and he actually decides to check.
Corey does slow down. Richard now with a monster 2-pair, trying to get some value out of it here on the turn.
It's definitely not the kind of 2-pair you want to slow play, and Richard decides to bet $115,000, hoping that Corey has something to call him with.
$115,000. Action now return to Corey.
Unfortunately for Richard, Corey does not have anything to call him with. He is going to fold, and Richard's going to win this first hand of the night.
Richard has done a really good job of keeping up the momentum here, and that's what you can expect from a player who plays a solid, tight, aggressive game such as Richard.
When we started this final table 9-handed like we always do, Maria, you knew half the final table, and a couple of your friends are still here, Sean and Richard. Richard was under the gun in this hand. He folds, and Steven wakes up with a monster pocket kings. He's going to make it $150,000 to go.
Sean in the small blind will act next.
Sean looks interested in this hand. He's in the small blind.
Sean wins the Best Dressed award at this final table. The fedora and the sunglasses, pretty much rocking.
Sean says re-raise.
And he decides to 3-bet here with ace-king offsuit from the small blind, which is completely standard. It's just unlucky that Steven has as huge of a hand as he does.
Corey lays his hand down. Now action back to Steven.
I'm out.
And now Steven's trying to think if he should 4-bet here or if he should just smooth call. Kings is a huge hand to have 4 ways, but it's just about whether or not he thinks Sean has a good enough hand to call if he does move all in.
All in.
Steven is going to 4-bet all in, and Maria, I like this play. What do you think?
Well, I think it just depends on what he thinks Sean is 3-betting with. I have to say, with a 36 big blind stack, Sean is definitely capable of 3-betting light here. So there is something to be said for Steven just flatting his 3-bet. But in this situation, Sean has ace-king, and he has no choice but to call. It's just going to be a cooler for him.
Steven hoping to fade the ace. The kings known as ace magnets. It's going to be a sweat.
The flop is 4, 10, 7, all spades. And because Steven has the king of spades, he has now taken the ace of spades away from Sean as an out.
Good flop for Steven to eliminate a player here. The turn comes the 8 of clubs. So now Sean down to just 2 aces left in the deck that can help him. The ace of clubs and the ace of diamonds.
Deuce of diamonds, please.
And the river is the queen of diamonds, and Sean is not going to be able to get lucky again at this final table for his life, and he is eliminated in 4th place, taking home $34,722.
Great run for the young man. I hope we see him on the HPT again real soon, probably when we're back in Vegas. The stars came out in droves to play this event. Steve Patch stacking the chips, getting ready for 3-handed poker against 2 very accomplished pros. We'll see how the action unfolds when we come back on the HPT.
Welcome back to the Stratosphere Casino, Hotel, and Tower, where everybody's a VIP. Let's head back to final table action, and we'll send things over to Freddie and Maria.
And for the first time all final table, we have a new chip leader. Stephen Patch, after knocking out Sean Solar, surges into the lead with $4.85 million. Richard Leindacker is doing just fine though, $3.69 million. And Corey Walland has just over $2 million.
A lot of room to play for all of these stacks. Even Corey, as the short stack, still with 42 big blinds left. So we got a long way to go before we get to a champion. 3-handed poker, the button acts first pre-flop. And in this case, that will be Corey Walland. He limps in with 7-6 offsuit. Now the action's on Richard.
Richard decides to call from the small blind with 8-7. And I'd like to mention that I've said this before, I don't really like limping in on the button in unopened pots, but sometimes when you feel like you have good players in the blind, you might want to just play small ball and see flops.
And the flop is Jack, Ace, Deuce, Rainbow. Richard and Corey miss this flop. Steven connects with bottom pair.
And in a situation like this where somebody limped in from the button, it usually gets checked to him because they're afraid he might have been trying to get tricky pre-flop with a big hand. And I don't really even see Steven calling here with bottom pair, but he decides that he wants to try to see this hand through.
I think Steven's playing a great game. He is called when he's supposed to call. He's folded when he's supposed to fold. The turn is an ace of diamonds.
And I think that might make Steven feel a little bit better about his hand, but the truth is if Corey wanted to fire both turn and river here, he could probably win.
Corey checks back after Steven's check. The river is the 3 of diamonds. And Maria, it looks like Steve is staging a bet here.
I think Steve isn't really sure where he's at with his hand, so it's more than likely he's turning his hand into a bluff. I don't know if Corey can do much in this spot. He can't really rep much here. If he tried to raise the river, he might just have to let it go.
Corey.
I'm just kidding. I know I had him.
Corey is going to lay it down, and look at this. Steven scoops another pot off the pros at this table.
Hey, do the penalty
The button in this hand starts with Richard.
I mean, like, I'm not texting anything.
Richard Leindacker, an accomplished pro, good friend of Maria's.
No, so is it really a penalty?
Stephen Patch, a policy analyst from Colorado.
No, but really, is it a penalty?
He's got the best drawing hand in poker, king, queen offsuit.
How's that
Getting
worked
tips.
out for you,
My phone.
Fred?
I'm only down about
gotta
a
have
million
one
with
half
this
play
hand. Still love it though. Steve's gonna limp in.
1.25
You basically do this job just so you could play King
on top.
Queen.
That's pretty much it. Corey is gonna raise it here, makes it 175,000 with an offsuited ace, and Steve's gonna make the call with King Queen.
Never mind. You're good. Yeah, you're good.
You raised it 1.25.
You just didn't count it. You just skewed it in. I just wanted to make sure it was right.
And I bet it's pretty difficult for Corey to put Steven on a hand as strong as King Queen, since Steven did just limp in from the small blind. These players are really doing a good job of mixing it up here.
Comes King of Hearts.
The flop is King 8 deuce, a couple of hearts. King Queen pulls ahead.
And this is why limping in blind versus blind with a hand as strong as King Queen is really great, because now your opponent who did raise pre-flop is going to try to rep your hand.
Corey's gonna bet 140,000.
140,000.
If I were Steven, I'd just like him to call here. There's no real reason for him to raise, and that way he could probably get Corey to bet another street.
And that's exactly what he does. So Steven with the best hand right now. Corey still has the ace.
Let's see a turn, please.
Onto the turn we go. It's the Queen of Hearts. Good news and bad news. Steven's hit top 2 pair. Corey now has a backdoor nut flush draw.
And I actually like Steven's lead here. He probably doesn't want to give Corey a free card just in case he does have a heart here. And at the same time, Corey has turned equity here with his nut flush draw. Steve's bet size is on the bigger side here.
And look at this, Maria. Corey is going to semi-bluff his draw by raising, making it 850,000 to go.
That's 6.
And I think Corey
7,
took
8.
Steve's check call on the flop and lead in on the turn as weakness. And Corey having the nut flush blocker in his hand feels like maybe he could try to take this pot right now.
So Maria, if you're in Steven's shoes here, do you just go all in?
Well, this is quite the predicament because Corey really has left himself with, 800, 900K back. But Steven can't really fold top 2 here, can he? So Corey decides now that he is committed after Steven does re-raise all in, and he's on the nut flush draw.
Steven hoping to fade a heart on the river here, Maria, and take us to heads up poker. Corey hoping to find a heart and double up.
The river's a 10 of clubs, and Corey misses his flush and thus being eliminated in 3rd place.
Corey is going to go back home to Leland, North Carolina with just under $50,000 in his wallet. A very, very nice run for this young man in a tough field here in Las Vegas. Corey's now standing by on the floor with the poker room manager here at the Stratosphere, Dieter, to get his thoughts on today's play.
Thanks, guys. We're here with Corey Weiland, our 3rd place finisher here at the Stratosphere, HPT Las Vegas. 3rd place finish today. How you feeling today?
Right now I'm a little upset, to be honest with you, but I don't know, I kind of, when I went to that hand, and not even to talk specifics, but basically that was the hand that I was going with. I seen him make a certain play a couple times before, and when he let out and I'm in raise right there, my hand looks a lot stronger, and obviously I still have the backdoor flush draw, but didn't get there. Nice hand, Steve, great player. Those 2 guys are very deserving of it, but just didn't work out for me today, but I'm very happy with it.
Well, Corey, it's been a pleasure having you with us.
Thank you, bud. Appreciate
Thank you very much. Congratulations, and back to you guys.
Thank you very much, Dieter. Congratulations again, Corey. Maria, we are heads up. Here is the updated chip count.
Richard Leindacker has about 3.7 million, but with 74 big blinds, you better believe that he is going to put up a really tough fight.
Blinds continuing on here, heads up at 25.50 and a 5K ante. You can see we've readjusted the players. Steve is now in the 7 seat. We've moved Richard over to the 3 seat, and the button will be on Steven as we start heads up.
In heads up play, the small blind is the button, and in this case, that makes Steven first to act.
Steven will have position post flop. He's going to make it 200,000 with King Deuce offsuit.
And you could expect that since these players are both so deep, there is going to be a lot of post flop play here.
Looks like Richard is going to make the call with ace queen. Sneaky, sneaky.
Looks like Richard is hoping to draw Steven in after the flop. He probably knows that ace queen is best here.
The flop is Jack King 7 rainbow, so Steven hits this flop hard with top pair.
Richard has flopped a gut shot straight draw, though a 10 will give him Broadway.
410,000 in the pot, and Steven is going to bet 400,000.
And although Steven has played a great game to get here, this is kind of where his bet sizing is very telling. Like I said earlier, we noticed Steven raise 3x when he had ace-6 of spades. And I feel like now he's betting almost pot size on this flop because he really doesn't want to see another card come off. He feels like his top pair with a weak kicker isn't great enough to withstand a lot of runouts.
Richard calls.
Richard is going to make the call with a gut shot and ace-queen high. The turn is a 2 of hearts, so no help for Richard on that.
Except now Steven has improved to 2 pair, kings and deuces. Now, if Steven does bet a little bit smaller, I feel like Richard's going to be able to pick up these bet sizing tells that I think Steven has.
Well, he bet the pot on the flop. I'm expecting a big bet coming here on the turn, and that is a big, tall stack of white chips worth $25,000 each. 800 is the total bet, and that's going to be good enough for Richard to lay it down, and Steven is going to draw first blood here, heads up.
In heads-up play, it's difficult to connect with the board, so if Steven keeps hitting flops like this, then he might emerge as our winner.
One of these two players will be our next HPT champion. Find out who that's going to be from the Stratosphere Casino Resort and Tower. This amazingly competitive field here in Las Vegas at the Stratosphere is now down to the final 2 players remaining. Heads up poker for over $122,000, and the championship begins now. Let's check in with the updated chip count.
Steven's trying to chip away at Richard here in heads-up play, extending his lead by about 500,000 chips. Richard still has a lot of play left in his stack, though.
At 64 big blinds, certainly nothing to panic about. Steven has played a great game getting heads up here and even just getting to the final table in this tough field. Right now he has to overcome one more experienced young pro to take down the championship. Right now he's sitting on 70% of the chips in play. Let's see if he can hang on to them.
Looks down at pocket 4s. Any pair heads up looks pretty good.
He's just going to limp in here with a pocket pair.
And honestly, I've been fairly impressed with Steven's play. He's definitely tried to mix it up here, and this isn't an easy opponent by any means.
Richard is going to raise here to $125,000. Maria, pocket kings? Are you kidding me?
Huge, huge hand heads up, obviously. And Steven looks like he's going to call in position with the 4s.
Let's see the flop.
To the flop we go. It is 9-9 deuce with a couple of hearts. Richard's kings way ahead.
And this is the kind of flop where Steven might get a little bit stuck with his pocket pair. And Richard is going to slyly just check it over to Steven.
Sneaky, sneaky.
Steven, feeling pretty good about 9s and 4s here, is going to bet 300,000. And once again, Steven's putting out a huge bet, a little bit over pot size this time. And I know that Richard is good enough to pick up on things like this.
Richard's sitting on a monster here. Looks like he is just going to call the 300 and let Steven fire another bullet at it on the turn.
The turn is the 6 of clubs. Richard checks it again to Steven. And now you've got to be pretty happy if you're Richard. You know that your opponent loves to make huge bets, so you know that you can maximize the value of your kings here.
And Steven is going to fire again, this time 600,000. Richard's got to be doing cartwheels in his head.
I think Richard's planning on calling again here and hoping to get one more street of value on the river.
And with Richard's call, this pot is now over $2 million in chips. Big, big swing hand coming here, Maria.
And there should be a few red flags going off in Steven's head right now. Maybe he thinks Richard is just calling him down with ace high here, but I have a feeling that if Steven doesn't improve, he is going to check back the river.
Well, Steven just got counterfeited as the 6 of hearts falls on the river, so now 2 pair, 9s and 6s are on the board. Steven literally has no poker hand right now.
He knows he has to bet to win, but he decides to check behind as the flush also comes in.
The players table their hand, and Steve's going to see he was beat the entire way, and a huge, huge pot worth over $2 million in chips is going to go Richard's way, and that is not what you want to do if you're Steven right now. You don't want to give this young pro any more ammunition. Just like that, one hand, the momentum is starting to change and go Richard's way. Blinds continuing here at 25 and 50 with a 5K. Why don't poker players ever smile? I mean, they always act like they're waiting on a test result. This time, Richard wakes up with pocket threes. He's going to make it 100,000 to go.
Steven calls from the big blind with Queen Jack offsuit.
Third hand heads up. The flop is King 8-6 with a couple of diamonds. So both players miss the flop here. Richard's still ahead with pocket threes. Steven's still 2 overcards to the threes, but that king might slow both these guys down.
And now Steven just bets into Richard. Huge bet again, just over pot size. And this is where I feel like Steven's inexperience might be showing a bit. He definitely has some betting tells, some tendencies, and I feel like Richard is going to be able to pick up on that and exploit it.
Richard is going to make the call with the pocket threes after Steven bet out on the flop. The turn is the ace of clubs.
Steve will lead out.
Now Steven's actually turned a gut shot that might give him just what he needs to bet again, although he might be afraid that this card has actually hit Richard's hand.
Steve is going to check over to Richard.
Now Richard has to decide if he wants to turn his threes into a bluff. He's not really sure what Steven has.
Richard checks.
He is going to check back. Onto the river we go.
The river is the 8 of hearts, and it pairs the board, and it looks like Steven's going to lead again. This is an interesting spot for Richard because it could be plausible that Steven did lead out with middle pair there on the flop.
Steve bets 1 million.
$1 million is the bet to Richard.
That is way over the pot. The pot was 610,000. And now Richard needs to decipher whether this bet size means that he's on a bluff or that he has something. You got to think, though, if Steven has an 8, would he bet that big? Would he bet 1 million chips? Wouldn't he want to get a call? But it just seems like that was too big of a bet for Richard to try to make a hero call.
Time now for a poker life featuring legendary poker player Doyle Brunson, brought to us by our friends at Ace Play Poker. You know, today's poker, the table might as well be a bank. You can step up, go to the bathroom, have a meal, and leave hundreds of dollars on the table with you. Back in Doyle's day, it was a different story. Here's Mr. Brunson telling us about stashing your money.
We kept money in our pocket, but we put lock it in the car, sometimes in the trunk. And if we could get to the car, there wasn't anybody going to get our money because we had guns ourselves that we protect ourselves with. And they had to get us between the door and the car. Because if we got to the car, one guy would usually go first and drive the car up, and we'd jump out and get in and take a go.
Thank you again, Tex Dolly, for being part of the HPT. We have a lot more fun poker coming up. Don't go anywhere.
Welcome back to the HPT, coming to you from the Stratosphere Casino, Hotel, and Tower. Let's get back to the action. We'll send things over to Freddie and Maria.
There's been a little bit of back and forth in this heads-up match so far, both players taking turns scooping pots from the other. Stephen Patch is still in the lead, though, with just over 7 million. Richard Leindacker hanging in and just waiting for the right opportunity to strike.
Richard with 59 big blinds left in his stack, plenty of room to play, but I gotta say, Maria, I'm really impressed with Stephen's play here. The last hand right before break, firing constantly to get Richard to lay down the best pair. Blinds are going up this hand. They're now 30 and 60,000 with a 10,000 chip ante. Richard is going to raise it up here on the button with 9-7 of diamonds. Makes it 125,000 to go.
Stephen looks down at ace 4 of diamonds.
And he is going to make the call and see a flop.
The flop is 4 Jack 3 rainbow. Steve does connect, making a pair of 4s here.
Not a whole lot for Richard to celebrate with here with just 9 high, but he did take the lead in betting pre-flop. Let's see if he fires a continuation bet. And he does. 150,000 is the price to see a turn card.
It's pretty standard for Richard to see bet here. This isn't really the kind of flop texture that you need to be checking back as the pre-flop aggressor.
And Stephen is going to make the call with his middle pair.
The turn is the 8 of diamonds, and that gives Steven a pair of 4s and the nut flush draw, but Richard has also turned a gut shot straight flush draw. Steven checks it over to Richard, and now that Richard has turned a whole lot of equity in his eyes, I'm sure he's going to bet again.
Yeah, big action card here on the turn with the 8 of diamonds. Steven checks over to Richard, knowing he's going to call whatever bet he puts out. 350,000. And Steven's already staging the chips. Not going to go anywhere heads up with a pair and a nut flush draw. He makes the call, and Steven's going to the river way ahead, as you can tell by the percentages. Let's see if it holds.
The river is the ace of hearts, and even though Steven hasn't hit his flush, he has made 2 pair, aces and 4s. He has to know that that's the best hand now.
Steve checks.
And he checks it over to Richard. Richard knows the only way he can win this hand is to try to bet Steven off of it.
But unfortunately, he's just going to get a quick call from Steven, at least.
725,000 is the bet. A great play, just unfortunate timing for Richard. He's trying to rep the ace, but Steven rivered aces up. Steven definitely not going anywhere, Maria. Question is he going to try to raise and get a little more value out of this? He can't be afraid of much.
He's definitely not afraid of much, but maybe he just doesn't want to put himself in a tough spot. And he also knows that if he does raise here, Richard might not call him. So he is just going to call. And Richard's going to see that this bluff can't work when your opponent has 2 pair. I think Richard's just happy that the flush didn't come, though.
Yeah, after seeing the hands tabled, he's very grateful a diamond didn't come on the river. And that pot just under 2.8 million. Steven, the amateur at this final table, has a stronghold on the situation right now. Steven now looks down at 4-5 offsuit.
Call.
He's going to limp in from the button. Look at this. Richard with pocket jacks.
Huge hand for Richard here. I'm sure he's going to raise.
Richard makes it 200,000.
And this is where I understand that in heads-up play, you're going to play a lot more hands, but you don't have to play every hand. I don't necessarily mind Steven limping in here, but I might just fold 5-4 offsuit against the raise, even in position.
The flop is 7-7 king, rainbow.
7 of spades.
So Richard's jack still way ahead, but he's going to check it over to Steve to see if he's going to fire like he has been. Steve stages a bet, pushes it out to the front, and it equals 300,000 in chips. And a quick call here from Richard.
Still a pretty decent flop for Richard, even with the 1 over card.
Maria, I think the fact that Steve limp called the raise here, it's impossible to put Steven on a king. And now the second king comes on the turn with a king of hearts. Richard's got to feel really good about pocket jacks, no?
That's definitely got to make Richard feel a lot more comfortable. And he checks again to Steve, but this time Steve wisely is going to check behind.
The river is the 8 of diamonds. Richard has this hand locked up unless Steven tries to represent the 7 or the king here.
I think as played, Richard is just trying to go for the value bet, and I'm sure Steve is going to have to fold here. Looks like he's trying to do something crazy.
Oh, this is ill-advised timing to try to run a bluff.
If you're Richard here, you know Steven's not going to raise the river with a 7. So you just have to think if he has the king or not. And I guess Richard does give Steven the benefit of the doubt here, feeling like maybe he checked back king's full there on the turn and is going to fold the best hand.
Steven Patch, policy analyst from Colorado Springs, Colorado, once again runs a successful bluff. More poker on the HPT. We're heads up for over 122,000 when we come back. Thanks for sitting through those commercials. We are at the Stratosphere in Las Vegas, Nevada with 122,000 on the line. Let's check in with the updated chip counts.
Now things are looking a little more dicey for Richard. He's down to 1.1 million, which is 19 big blinds. Steven looking to close the door on this championship. 9.5 million is his chip stack.
89% of the chips in this tournament are in front of Steven Patch. Richard Leindecker, only 11% of the chips in play. If Richard's going to make a comeback, he's going to have to get the momentum on his side sooner than later. Blinds are continuing at 30,000, 60,000 with a 10,000 chip ante. The button is on Steven, so he'll be first to act pre-flop. He looks down at 4 deuce offsuit. In my opinion, a fine hand to fold.
I agree with you, but I think Steven's just going with it at this point. He's got such a huge chip lead and a lot of momentum, but Richard wakes up with ace-9, which is good enough to go all in here.
1.3 million?
Absolutely is. And Steven, I think just getting a count for show. I can't imagine he's going to call off his chips with 4 high.
I don't know if there's much point doing all this here. You just limped in from the button. It wasn't like you raised, and you have to pretend like you don't raise with anything that you can't call with. So, you know, I just let it go. Leave the Hollywooding up for the actors.
Well, Maria, I don't think he's Hollywooding here. Steven is staging chips, and I don't know why. I got to be honest. I don't know why. He just limped into the pot. Richard is an accomplished, seasoned pro. Even though he's young, he's got a world of experience under his belt.
I can't believe Steven calls here. How do you limp call with 4 deuce in this spot? Richard is not the kind of person you want to double up unless Steven is so intimidated of Richard that he just wants to try to end this match on a pure gamble.
4 deuce,
it just
please.
Doesn't make any sense. He's played pretty well so far, but this is a huge misstep.
The flop is Jack, deuce, 7. Maria, he's outflopped Richard.
And I'm sure Richard is still happy that he is playing against somebody who's going to call his all-in with 4 deuce here, but he's not happy that he outflopped him. The turn is a 6 of spades. Richard is down to an ace or a 9 on the river, or else he will finish in second place.
Steven, hoping to be the newest HPT champion, needs to fade 6 outs here on the river, and he does not do it. Richard hits the 9 of spades on the river and is going to double up. And just like that, Maria, he goes from just over $1 million to over $2.3 million in chips. Wow.
I gotta say, there's a little bit of justice in that river card, and Richard just looking very stoic, very calm, knows he's back in it, knows that Steven's gonna call his all-ins with very, very bad hands. I think Richard feels pretty good.
You know, Maria, I think you made a great point that Steven just wants to get this match over with. I think the deeper it goes heads up, the more it favors Richard because he is such an experienced player. So in that mindset, maybe you can give a little justification to a 4 deuce call just because he wants to get lucky. But yeah, you know, against a player like Richard, keep the short stack short. This hand, the button will be on Richard, and he is going to limp in from the button. And it looks like Steve is going to check his option with 5 deuce suited.
The flop is 8-4-4 rainbow, and Steven says, why not? I'm going to try to bet. Hopefully I could win.
That might work on any other hand where Richard hasn't connected with top pair. Steven's going to bet 250,000. And Richard makes the ho-hum call.
It's pretty easy for Richard to just call down here against Steven.
Turn card, please.
The turn is the 5 of spades, giving Steven 5s and 4s now, so he's going to bet again.
Steven might be feeling pretty comfortable now that he's connected with the board. And his bet is going to make me believe what I just said. He fires just over $500,000, 525,000.
I'm having a little bit of a problem with Steven's bet size here, heads up. It's just too big whether he's bluffing or value betting, and it's just costing him a lot of chips with the second best hand against Richard here.
Well, I think you see this with a lot of amateur players. They get short-handed or heads up. They just want to get it over with, so they play a lot more wider and they play a lot more faster. The river is the 3 of clubs. So neither help to either player. Richard has the best hand, but it's Steven that's doing the firing. Bets another $500,000.
I think Steven might think he's value betting here, but I would have just checked if I were him. And Richard is going to call this river bet and see that he has the best hand. And this is where Steven's bet sizing costs him a huge pot when it could have been a little bit of a smaller pot.
Almost $2.7 million in the pot going Richard's way. And like I've said before, Richard is a young pro with a lot of experience beyond his years. This heads-up match is getting very interesting. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back from the Stratosphere in Las Vegas.
Welcome back to the HPT here from Sin City, Las Vegas, Nevada, here at the Stratosphere Casino, Hotel, and Tower. Let's head back to the final table, and we'll send things over to Freddie and Maria.
Richard's got a little bit of his footing back now, up to 3.8 million. Steven Patch still with the chip lead with just under 7 million.
This heads-up match started with Steven holding about 90% of the chips in play, and now he's holding just about 65% of the chips in play. So Richard on the slow grind back to making this an even-up match. Blind still at 30 and 60,000 with a 5K ante.
Richard looks down at Jack 9 of diamonds and is going to limp in.
And Steve is going to check his option with ace 4 off.
We're going to see a flop.
So on to the flop we go.
The flop is 6, 10, 8, 2 spades.
10 spades, 8.
Steven has completely missed this flop. Richard doesn't connect, but he does flop an open-ended straight draw.
He's going to follow it up with a continuation bet.
And Steve is going to make the call. You can see by the hand percentages, Steve has the best of it right now.
I think he also called because he had the ace of spades in his hand.
The turn is the 5 of hearts. Steve once again checks over to Richard, and Richard's going to slow down, hoping to hit his hand on the river. He doesn't hit the straight, but he does connect with top pair. So now Richard has the best hand unless Steven can somehow push him off again.
Steven checks it over to Richard, and I think that Richard could fire a value bet here on the river and feel pretty good about it.
Richard definitely firing a bet. He's going to make it 275,000.
And I just don't think this is the kind of board texture that Steven needs to be calling down with ace high.
You're right, Marie. It's very draw-heavy board. A straight is out there. A flush is out there. But he does make the call. Richard's going to table his Jack 9 and show top pair. And Steven's going to have to muck, and it's another almost 900,000 going Richard's way. So again, Maria just slowly grinding and chipping away at Steve's chip lead.
And I think this happens to a lot of people sometimes when you have the chip lead heads up. You start feeling a little bit of a false sense of security. I think Steven needs to tighten up a little bit and not really leak any chips, especially to somebody like Rich.
This hand, Steven looks down at Jack 6 offsuit. And he is going to raise it up, makes it 230,000.
230,000.
And look at this. Pocket aces heads up, re-raises it to 575,000. That's not even fair. Pocket aces, really?
And like I said about Steven tightening up the reins here, it's just not a great call to make with Jack 6 offsuit against a fairly hefty re-raise. I think Steven's getting himself into some unnecessary trouble. The flop is Queen 7-3, 2 clubs.
Richard is out of position, so he'll be first to act post-flop, and he is going to fire. Why wouldn't he? Big bet coming. Looks like a little over $1 million, 1.075 million. 1,075,000 chips.
And I think Richard bet that size because he's giving Steven credit for a lot better of a hand than what Steven actually called his re-raise with. And Richard's hoping that he could just get all of the chips if Steven does have a pretty decent hand.
What's confusing me right now is Steven is going to raise it here.
Steven just on a stone cold bluff. And if I were Richard, I'd probably just move all in without the ace of clubs.
All in.
And Maria, you're right. That's what Richard does. He is just going to move them all in right now. And I can't imagine Steven making the call here with Jack high. He's just going to have to lick his wounds and move on.
All in.
Wow, he does make the call with just Jack high, Maria.
Oh, dear.
And he is going to find out that he is ran right into pocket aces.
I don't understand that at all, unless he's putting Richard on a 10 high or lower flush draw. I think Steven's done a great job to get to heads up play, but I feel like he has just made several huge missteps heads up, and I don't think he's going to be able to recover.
5, please.
The turn is the 4 of
please.
spades,
One time.
leaving Steven with just a gut shot straight draw. He'll be hoping for a 5 on the river.
Good hand.
River's not going to do it. It pairs the 7, and Richard is going to get a full double up, leaving Steven all but crippled
Pain leaving
here.
my body.
When we started heads up, it looked like Steven Patch was going to be the next HPT champion, but the momentum and the lion's share of the chips are now in front of Richard Leindecker. More Heads Up Poker when we come back to the HPT.
Welcome back to the HPT, coming to you from the Stratosphere Casino, Hotel, and Tower. The cash games have been great all week inside the poker room. Now let's get back to final table action.
Richard Leindecker has the lion's share of the chips now. He has just under 10.1 million. Stephen Patch has just 9 big blinds with 560,000.
Second place from the Stratosphere here in Las Vegas is going to pay $74,346. The championship's going to go home with just under $123,000. That's about a $48,000 difference between first and second place. In this hand, Steven is on the button, first to act, and he's going to get the last of his chips in the middle with 9-8 of diamonds. Maria, just under 600,000 in chips at this stage of the tournament. Is that an auto call kind of a stat?
Yeah, I think that Richard's going to call with about 70% of his hands in this spot.
Any chance you get to close the door on a tournament and seal the victory, you want to take advantage of it. And Richard is going to make the call with King 6. So Richard will be going to the flop ahead for the championship, but Steven does have live cards.
9s or 8s, please.
9-8 suited fares pretty well up against Richard's King 6 offsuit.
The rail is on their feet. We're all waiting for the flop.
9-8.
The flop is 7-4-6, all spades. Richard has paired his 6s, but Steven has an open-ended straight draw.
A 5 or a 10 is what Steven will be looking for. The 9 and the 8 are also live.
5, 10, 9, 8.
Turn, please.
Let's see the turn.
The turn is the deuce of diamonds, not what Steven's looking for.
Steven hoping to find one of his outs on the river, which does not happen. It's the ace of clubs, and that is going to do it.
Well,
Richard Leindecker, our newest HPT champion. Steven Patch is going to go home in second place. And I am very curious to hear what Steven has to say about how this table played out, especially heads up. He's down on the floor with the poker room manager from the Stratosphere, Dieter, to get his thoughts.
You're the aggressor early on. You had a huge chip lead. What do you think happened today?
Oh, I think it's the way poker goes. Sometimes you get the bear, and sometimes the bear gets you. All of us have experienced, chip swings and that, but that's why I love the game. You just never know. You just never know. And even when I'm running not so good today, I really appreciate all that you guys did here at Stratosphere, bringing us out. Great tournament, great structure, great personnel. Appreciate it.
We really appreciate that, Steven. You navigated through a field of 353 players. What are you going to do with the money?
Well, the good news, any cash in any tournament means that I get to play more tournaments. So you'll see me in some more HPT events. I really appreciate all that you guys did today.
That sounds awesome, Steven. Thank you very much. Congratulations to yourself.
Thanks.
Back to you guys.
Thank you very much, Steve. Congratulations on your second place finish. The champion from the Stratosphere here in Las Vegas is professional player Richard Leindecker. He played an amazing game. I know I learned a lot from watching his hole cards and how he plays them. He's down on the floor with poker room manager Dieter to get his thoughts on his latest championship.
Congratulations to our newest HPT champion. Right here in Las Vegas, the Stratosphere Hotel, Casino, and Tower, Richard Leindecker. You came in heads up this evening. About 2-1 chip behind. You picked up some momentum, caught a couple of real key hands. When did you feel you had it turned around?
Well, I came in with a 2-1 chip deficit, and I wasn't too sure how I wanted to play against this opponent. And when he showed that he was going to be incredibly aggressive, I decided that I could pick good spots to get my money in. Unfortunately, those spots didn't develop the way I had hoped, so I ultimately had to gamble a little bit. Once I won that first all-in to get back to around 3 million with the ace-9, I felt pretty good, and I thought I would likely be able to get in good enough spots to win the match. And I picked up aces, and that happened. So, yeah, he was a very tough, aggressive player, but stuck with my game plan. I folded a lot of hands, which may have looked strange to some people, but I thought that I could wait for very good spots to put a lot of chips in, and I did.
Well, you did a wonderful job, Richard, with $122,000 in winnings. What are you going to do with the money?
Well, pretty much just goes into the poker and life bankroll since I'm a professional, so that's where it's going.
Well, once again, congratulations. Maria and Fred, turn back over to you.
Congratulations again, Richard. Thank you very much, Dieter. Now, Maria, I know it's no surprise to you that Richard is our newest champion. You're friends with him. What is your take on the way he played this final table?
Well, you know, I've known Richard for a while now, and he's widely known in poker circles as a great cash game player, but obviously his tournament game is just as good, and he's just played a really smart game all the way through. And I think when it got to heads up and Richard's back was up against the wall, Steven just made a few really big mistakes, went off the rails a little bit, opened the door for Richard to come in and snatch that championship right out of his hands.
Really, really did. Congratulations again to Richard Leindecker, our newest HPT champion here from the Stratosphere. Now, do you think you have what it takes to sit down at an HPT final table and compete for unreal money on a national stage? Well, then log on to hptpoker.com and find an event near you. For Maria Ho and James Larson, I'm Fred Bevel. We'll see you next time right here on the HPT.